On the morning of March 20th, 1995, Tokyo moved with its usual precision. The trains arrived on time, platforms filled and emptied in careful rhythm, office workers adjusted their ties, students scanned textbooks, newspapers rustled softly in crowded hands. It was an ordinary Monday. In a city of over 12 million people, anonymity is effortless. You can stand inches from someone and never truly see them. You can share the same air and never exchange a word. That morning, 5 men blended perfectly into that anonymity. They did not look nervous. They did not move quickly. They carried plastic bags wrapped in newspaper. Nothing about them seemed urgent. Nothing about them seemed dangerous. They boarded separate trains along lines that converged near the heart of the government district. They waited. At 8 a.m., during peak rush hour, each man placed his package on the floor beside his feet. Then, using the sharpened tip of an umbrella, they punctured the bags. They stepped off at the next station. There was no explosion, no flash, no warning, only a faint, strange odor. Passengers began coughing. A few assumed it was a cleaning chemical. Someone covered their nose. Another laughed awkwardly, as if the moment could be explained away by routine. Within minutes, eyes began to burn. Vision blurred. Muscles tightened involuntarily. A man collapsed near the train door. A woman slid down against the wall, confused and disoriented. Someone tried to stand and found their legs would not respond the way they always had, and the train kept moving. Because in Tokyo, trains always keep moving. By the time emergency services were alerted, multiple subway lines were contaminated. Hospitals began receiving patients who could not see clearly, who struggled to breathe, who could not explain what had happened to them. Doctors quickly identified the cause. Sarin, a nerve agent developed for chemical warfare. It attacks the body's nervous system. It overwhelms muscles and organs that normally operate without thought. It turns the simple act of breathing into a struggle. 13 people would die. More than 6,000 were injured. But the deeper shock was psychological. Japan was considered one of the safest countries in the world. Violent crime was rare. Terrorism was nearly unheard of. And yet someone had just used chemical weapons in a civilian subway. The question was not only who did this, the more unsettling question was why. The answer lay not in foreign enemies, but within a belief system that had been growing quietly for years. A movement that called itself Aum Shinrikyo, supreme truth. But truth, in this case, had been carefully reconstructed until it became something that could justify almost anything. And the most frightening part was this. The people inside Aum weren't all uneducated or unstable outsiders. Many were intelligent, accomplished, rational on paper, which raises a question that lingers long after the headlines fade. How does a modern, educated person, someone who understands science, logic, and reality, end up helping a cult carry out an attack like this? The answer is never a single moment. It's a process. Long before the attack, before the laboratories, before the gas, there was a man named Chizuo Matsumoto. He was born in 1955, partially blind, into a modest family. His childhood was marked by isolation, and isolation does something to a person when it lasts long enough. Some people withdraw. Others decide the world must be wrong about them. Matsumoto wanted recognition, influence, a place in history. He attempted to enter Tokyo University and failed. He pursued small business ventures and failed again. Repeated failure can fracture identity. When someone believes they are destined for significance, but reality refuses to confirm it, that gap demands an explanation. Some people adjust their expectations. Others redefine reality. In his 20s, Matsumoto turned toward spirituality, yoga, meditation, religious texts. But he didn't follow tradition. He reshaped it. He blended Buddhist concepts with Hindu mysticism. He pulled in apocalyptic Christian prophecy. He wove conspiracy into doctrine. implying hidden powers controlled society and that only a select few could see through the illusion. He renamed himself Shoko Asahara, and then he did something that would become the foundation of everything that followed. He spoke with absolute certainty. Certainty is magnetic. People don't always want truth, they want clarity. They want a story that makes the world feel understandable. Late 1980s, Japan was prosperous, modern, technologically advanced, yet many young people felt detached. Material success hadn't provided meaning, structure hadn't provided purpose. Asahara offered both. He claimed enlightenment, he claimed visions, he claimed he could heal, that he could read minds, that he could transfer spiritual energy through touch. And eventually he claimed something greater. He presented himself not just as a teacher, but as the final authority on reality itself. At first, Aum Shinrikyo looked like a spiritual community, meditation sessions, yoga practices, lectures about karma, suffering, and liberation. But inside, something subtle was happening. Recruits were not simply joining a group, they were entering a closed system, a system where Asahara's words became the lens through which everything was interpreted. And the recruitment pattern was unusual. Engineers joined, medical students joined, scientists joined, graduates from elite universities joined, people who were trained to doubt, people who were trained to question. So why did they stay? Because the cult didn't recruit intelligence. It recruited emotion, the feeling of being chosen, the relief of belonging, the seduction of a world where you are no longer ordinary. Aum made people feel seen, important, special. And once you feel special inside a group, the outside world starts to feel small. Then the boundaries tightened. It didn't happen overnight. First came the subtle separation from family. Parents were negative influence. Friends were attachments. Society was corrupt. Then came time control. Sleep was reduced. Schedules became rigid. Long sessions blurred exhaustion into trance. Then came confession. Members were encouraged to reveal doubts, fears, and weaknesses, not as private struggles, but as evidence of spiritual impurity. In a healthy environment, confession can be cleansing. In a cult, confession becomes leverage. Because once someone knows your shame, your doubts, your secrets, leaving becomes harder. And that's when the psychology changes. Leaving is no longer just walking away. Leaving becomes humiliation. Leaving becomes losing your identity. Leaving becomes admitting you were fooled. And for many people, the pain of admitting that feels worse than staying. Asahara understood this. He built an environment where belief wasn't simply accepted. Belief was rewarded. Obedience brought status. Doubt brought punishment. Questioning the leader was treated as spiritual failure. He positioned himself as the only one capable of guiding them through the coming apocalypse. And then he escalated the fear. He preached that the world was approaching collapse, that governments were preparing mass violence, that enemies were everywhere, that Aum was under attack. In a system like this, paranoia becomes proof. If outsiders criticize the cult, it means the cult must be right. If the government investigates, it confirms the prophecy. Every threat becomes validation. Every contradiction becomes evidence of conspiracy. And gradually, morality began to shift. Asahara introduced a concept that turned the world upside down. He argued that killing could be an act of compassion, that eliminating enemies could save them spiritually, that violence, if done for the right cause, was purification. This is a critical moment in the psychology of extremist movements, because once violence becomes moral, once it becomes holy, there is no limit. At that point, the question is no longer, is this wrong? The question becomes, how far must we go? And Aum began to go further. Behind the scenes, Aum was expanding into something that looked less like a religion and more like a state. They acquired land, built compounds, established internal hierarchy, created departments. There was discipline, administration, security, and there was science. Asahara wasn't satisfied with being a prophet. He wanted power that could reshape reality. He attracted talented people and placed them into roles that sounded noble at first: research, development, protection. They were told they needed defenses against a hostile world. But defenses quickly became capabilities, and capabilities became weapons. This is how radicalization often happens in organizations, not with a single terrifying decision, but with a series of small decisions that slowly change what feels normal. At first, it's just research. Then it's just preparation. Then it's just testing. And by the time anyone admits what they're building, it's already built. Aum attempted biological agents first. Those efforts didn't produce the results Asahara wanted, so they turned to chemical weapons. The kind of weapons the world associates with war, not commuter trains. Sarin became the focus. And the terrifying part wasn't only that they tried, it was that they were close enough to cause real harm. In 1994, they carried out a rehearsal of sorts. In Matsumoto, sarin was released in a residential area. 8 people died. Hundreds were affected. Authorities suspected an accident, a local explanation, a private dispute. Aum avoided responsibility, and in the cult's internal logic, that avoidance felt like confirmation. They had power. They had secrecy. They had momentum. Asahara's paranoia grew into obsession. He became convinced the government would raid Aum's facilities soon. He believed the outside world was moving against him. And when a leader believes time is running out, the most dangerous decisions happen. Because urgency is the emotion that overrides restraint. Aum began planning a larger attack, not because they thought it was tragic, but because they believed it was necessary. They believed chaos would destabilize the state. They believed fear would weaken the government. They believed it would trigger the prophecy, and they believed history would justify them. The planning was cold, deliberate, almost bureaucratic. Targets were selected where impact would be maximum. Timing was chosen to catch the city at its most vulnerable, and the people chosen to carry it out weren't chosen because they were wild. They were chosen because they were loyal. The kind of loyalty where obedience feels like salvation. By the time March 20th arrived, the members involved likely didn't see themselves as murderers. They saw themselves as instruments. That's what makes the story so unsettling. Because when someone stops seeing themselves as responsible, anything can happen. After the subway attack, Tokyo didn't just suffer physical damage. It suffered a rupture in trust. People looked at commuters differently. They looked at ordinary bags differently. They looked at routine differently. Emergency responders were overwhelmed and unprepared for a chemical incident on that scale. Hospitals filled rapidly, confusion spread as fast as the gas had, and the government faced a terrifying realization. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't foreign espionage. This was domestic extremism, hidden in plain sight. Investigators moved quickly, and the pressure was intense. The public demanded answers. And slowly, Aum Shinrikyo emerged as the central suspect. It wasn't only the subway incident. There were earlier clues, complaints, strange purchases, reports of coercion, missing persons cases. When police began raiding Aum facilities, the scale of what they discovered shocked even seasoned investigators. Chemicals, protective gear, evidence of systematic planning, and perhaps most disturbing, indications that Aum had dreamed bigger, that the subway attack might not have been the final step, but a step along the way. Asahara was arrested in May 1995. He was found hiding in a concealed space inside one of the compounds, quiet, withdrawn, almost as if the world outside had finally become too real to face. The man who once claimed absolute spiritual authority now appeared diminished, The trials that followed lasted years. Testimonies revealed internal punishment framed as training. Members described psychological manipulation that slowly erased their independence. People spoke about how language itself changed inside the cult, how doubt became impurity, how obedience became enlightenment, how violence became compassion. This is another hallmark of dangerous movements. They don't just control behavior, they control the words people use to think. And when you control language, you control what feels possible. Some former members insisted they never thought it would go that far. Others admitted they did and believed it was justified. Many described the same emotional trap. Once you've sacrificed your relationships, your money, your career, and your identity, leaving feels impossible. Because leaving means you must face the unbearable thought that you gave everything to a lie. So instead, people stay, and the lie becomes their reality. In 2018, Shoko Asahara and several senior members were executed. But the story didn't end cleanly. Fragments of the organization survived in smaller forms. New names, new structures, same core idea that the world outside is corrupt and that salvation lies in obedience. And that is perhaps the final warning hidden in this case. Aum Shinrikyo was not a medieval cult. It did not belong to a distant century. It grew in a modern, educated society. It recruited people with degrees. It used modern technology. It operated like a system. It showed that the danger is not always chaos. Sometimes the danger is order. Order built around a single, unquestionable authority. Aum did not begin with violence. It began with purpose, with promises, with a leader who offered certainty to people who were tired of uncertainty. And step by step, the belief system shifted until ordinary morality no longer applied. The Tokyo subway attack wasn't the product of sudden madness. It was the final stage of a psychological progression. Isolation, certainty, fear, obedience, dehumanization, and then action. On that March morning, commuters entered trains expecting routine. They encountered something far more unsettling: the realization that danger does not always come from outside. Sometimes it grows quietly, behind spiritual language, behind promises of enlightenment, behind a leader who claims absolute truth. And when belief becomes unquestionable, the reckoning is only a matter of time. But to understand how something like this becomes possible, you have to step back even further. Japan in the late 1980s was not a country in crisis. It was thriving. The economy was booming. Technology was advancing. Cities were expanding at remarkable speed. Yet beneath that progress, there was a quiet psychological tension. A generation raised in stability was now facing pressure without purpose. Long working hours, social expectations, competitive academic systems, emotional restraint as cultural norm. Success was defined clearly, but meaning was not. And when a society becomes materially secure, existential questions grow louder. Who am I beyond my job? What is my purpose beyond productivity? What happens if the system I trust is fragile? Movements like Aum thrive in that gap. They don't grow in chaos. They grow in quiet dissatisfaction. Asahara's message wasn't only spiritual, it was rebellious. He told followers they were not cogs in a machine. They were enlightened beings trapped in a corrupt world. He reframed modern life as spiritual slavery. And once that narrative is accepted, separation becomes empowerment. Inside Aum compounds, members were told they were living in the future, that they were spiritually advanced beyond ordinary citizens. That suffering outside was proof of ignorance. This is one of the most powerful psychological shifts in cult environments: superiority. When members begin to believe they are morally or spiritually superior to society, empathy decreases. And when empathy decreases, harm becomes easier. The outside world is no longer made of individuals. It becomes an obstacle, or worse, an enemy. Asahara reinforced this constantly. He delivered sermons describing a coming war between Japan and the United States. He spoke of chemical attacks from foreign powers. He insisted that only Aum possessed the knowledge to survive. Fear is a powerful adhesive. It binds groups together. But fear alone is not enough. You also need structure. Aum had hierarchy, ranks, uniforms, rituals, daily routines. New members were gradually moved into communal living, where daily life was monitored. Their schedules were controlled. Their diets were regulated. Sleep was reduced. When someone is physically exhausted, their ability to question diminishes, and questioning is the first barrier to extremism. Over time, members began referring to outsiders in abstract terms, not as neighbors, not as commuters, but as spiritually lost. That abstraction matters. Because when you stop seeing individuals, you stop imagining their pain. And that psychological distance is what allows violence to feel theoretical. Inside laboratories, work intensified. But the scientists were not necessarily thinking about mass murder. They were thinking in tasks: chemical stability, storage methods, delivery systems. When harmful action is broken into technical steps, moral responsibility feels diluted. Each person handles only part of the process. No one feels fully accountable. This diffusion of responsibility is another recurring pattern in extremist movements, and it is terrifyingly effective. By the time plans for the subway attack were finalized, the members involved had been conditioned for years. They trusted the system. They trusted the leader. They trusted the prophecy. And they distrusted everything outside it. When March 20th arrived, there was no dramatic rally. No final speech, just quiet obedience. They carried out the plan calmly, because to them it was not chaos. It was duty. The aftermath revealed something equally disturbing. Many members did not immediately express remorse. Some insisted the attack had failed, only because it was not large enough. Others claimed it was a misunderstanding of divine will. This is what happens when ideology overrides personal morality. Evidence becomes irrelevant. Suffering becomes secondary. The narrative survives. During the investigations, authorities uncovered evidence that Aum had experimented with larger-scale operations. There were indications they had considered contaminating water supplies, indications of plans involving government buildings. The subway attack, horrifying as it was, may not have been their ultimate ambition. And that realization shook Japan deeply. It forced a national conversation about vulnerability. How could such a movement grow unnoticed? How could educated individuals participate? How could warning signs be ignored? Part of the answer lies in how modern societies perceive danger. We often look for visible instability. We look for chaos. We look for aggression. But Aum did not look chaotic. It looked organized, disciplined, spiritual. That calm exterior shielded something far more volatile. After the arrests, public perception of cults shifted dramatically in Japan. Laws were reconsidered, surveillance increased. But perhaps the most lasting impact was invisible. Trust changed. Commuters carried an awareness that routine could be interrupted, that safety was conditional, and that extremism could grow quietly in unexpected places. There is a tendency to treat cases like this as anomalies, to view them as rare aberrations, but the underlying mechanisms are not rare. Charismatic authority, isolation, moral reframing, fear-based cohesion, gradual normalization of extreme ideas. These patterns repeat across history. Aum Shinrikyo was uniquely Japanese in culture, but psychologically it was universal. It demonstrated that intelligence does not immunize someone against manipulation. Education does not prevent someone from seeking certainty. And modern infrastructure does not eliminate ancient human vulnerabilities. In the end, the Tokyo subway attack was not just an act of terror. It was a case study in how belief, when left unchecked, can detach from empathy. How devotion, when elevated above doubt, can become dangerous. And how systems built around unquestionable authority eventually collapse under their own rigidity. Because once doubt disappears, so does balance. And without balance, even the most structured movement can spiral. The trains in Tokyo still run on time. The city still moves with precision. But beneath that routine lies a memory, a reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows patiently, quietly, inside a system that feels certain, until the moment it decides to act. And when that moment comes, the reckoning is swift.